you want all those structures interacting in a way where they're all communicating, working as a team, absorbing forces into your body so you can then unleash the force back out. And so it's really just getting in touch with, hey, what does my knee, hip, ankle, shoulder think about me? Am I wearing the right shoes? Do I treat it nicely? Am I saying good things about it?
Mhm.
And do I train my body regionally? And that's the essence of the concept.
Welcome to Iron Summit, where we cover topics about health, fitness, and general performance through the eyes of former elite Division I wrestlers.
Awesome.
We're live.
We're live with another episode of Iron Summit. Very special guest today. We got Bob Baker. You wrestled at Towson State University. You're currently the president at Challenger Sports PT, specializing in biomechanics of sports injuries. You're in the middle of writing a book that we'd love to talk to you more about too. You got your MBA from University of Chicago and PhD from Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions. How's it going, Bob?
It's going great. Good to talk to you. And we've had prior conversations about how to train wrestlers, how to train athletes. So looking forward to picking up on that today.
Absolutely. So I guess first things first, how'd you get into wrestling? Obviously you love wrestling and we're huge fans of wrestling as well. What got you started in that and wrestling at a high level and then continuing to help out now and coach wrestling as well?
Well, yeah, I was actually brought up without a dad. So I was in fourth grade, very athletic, and this new kid came to school, and and nobody was really friends with him, and I was kind of the leader on the playground, and I said, "Hey, I'll take him on my team." So, I put him on my team. His name was Greg Long, and people were going like, kind of smirking, laughing, like, "Oh, he's not going to be any good." Well, this guy turned out to be like the top athlete of the top athlete. So he went home and told his dad, who's like the sports coach of all sports coaches in baseball, football, and wrestling. And his dad said, "Well, yeah, you tell, Bob Baker to come over here." And at the time, they were calling me Bobby Baker. So I went over and he said, "Oh, you don't have a dad?" He said, "Oh, I'm going to sign you up for baseball. I'm going to sign you up for football." Then after football, he signed me up for wrestling. I just jumped in the car and went. And yeah, I remember my first day at wrestling practice. I went in and they lined me up to wrestle against, well, one of his kids who was one of the best in the state, and this is in middle school. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Long, I don't really know how to wrestle." He goes, "Well, you know how to tackle." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I do know how to tackle." And then I saw eyes of this star wrestler get weak, and he got a little bit nervous, fidgety, and he was kind of like, "Wait, I don't think I like the sound of this." And then I saw that in his eyes, said, "Hey, I think I'm going to like this sport." And I tackled him. And then right then I was just like, "This is fun." So it was that, it's those coaches in the beginning that make it fun, that give you like what it takes psychologically to engage, and then that early success. And then, remembering the wins and forgetting the losses, so to say. I mean, there's something funny about that, but you really do remember those occasions where you throw someone or you pin them and they stick with you. And, for me, I mean, always enjoy trying to figure out, how to win. And, you know, what kept me engaged, what really excited me over time was the psychology of wrestling. So if you go out to wrestle somebody and you throw them or do a move that intimidates your opponent, they get anxious and they start to not really unleash their offense at you. And, you know, through the years, and especially as a coach, but definitely later in wrestling and in college, I really enjoyed the psychology of how can I unnerve my opponent so that they really aren't launching their offense at me. And a throw was something that really worked well, but there were other things, but a nice lateral drop or taking someone 180 through the air. And so as a coach, I've tried to add in those elements of psychology, of really getting moves down that are powerful, and maybe constant offense, which is more fun and more exciting for the fans. And then those the direction that as I finished in college, I was really pushing towards continuous offense, which, requires training that way, which is really intense, but it's so much fun. And I know that you guys know what I'm talking about. And when you start attacking for an entire match, if you're in shape, really wonderful things happen. And people come up to you after the match, even your opponents and the opposite coach, and they immediately know who you are because you attacked for the whole match. So as a coach, I have slowly developed those training methods to push my son, who's in 10th grade and really good, and others that I work with to really start attacking. And you have to train that way. And so that's the direction I've been going, is that a great defense is a great offense, and that maybe it's not 50-50
Yeah.
between defense and offense, but maybe it's 90-10 or 80-20 in favor of offense. So I'd be curious to get
Yeah.
your thoughts on that as well. But that's
I have a couple follow-up questions to that. And Ryan, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, off the podcast. But the first follow-up question, which is relating to the psychology piece, is what, and it's hard to put an exact number to it, but what percentage of wrestling do you think is psychological versus physical? This is a discussion we've had.
yeah, I've heard this discussion, this so I'll just go gut feel on that. I think it's 51
Perfect.
49, psychological, physical. But here's the overlay part of that is my son often asks me can I get a mindset coach? And this is really, I want to think like a champion. And and yes, there are great mindset coaches. And in fact, I had someone meet with him recently, and the guy blew me away. He was so good at the things that he was saying. But one part of that is if you go into the practice room, you're the hardest worker in the room, and you attack, and then you pick up technique and you use it, and you train that way. You train, like Ryan and I were talking, how do you train stance? Well, yeah, you've got to put in the time at home. It's not just going to come from practice. You've got to put in time to get the endurance. It's not just from doing 5 sets of 10 deadlifts, or 7 sets of 10 deadlifts. It's not going to do it. So if you train, if you put in the sweat, if you're up early in the morning, if you're training at 6, 8, 10 minutes of hard stance motion, your legs are burning, and you've been the hardest worker in the room. You've been watching what you eat. You've been, just really just on it. I mean, I think that there's a mindset component to that physicality. And so, you know, that's where the psychology overlays. It's like, it's not just, I think like a winner, but am I psychologically ready for every practice? Am I psychologically ready for when I get injured, how to optimize that time? Am I psychologically ready to deal with, maybe, I'm tired of dieting, and do I gap for 2 weeks where I perform at 80%, or am I psychologically going to be able to go 100%, even though I have pain, even though, I haven't eaten, or maybe, socially something is upsetting me. That's where the psychology overlays with the physical aspect of wrestling. And that's why I say, 51-49 psychological. And I know you could say it's 99-1
Yeah.
when you add in that
I
component of,
like it. Yeah,
But
no, I like that split. Go ahead, Ryan. I have some follow-up thoughts as well.
yeah, no, I think that's crazy. I completely agree. There's a huge mental component, and it's funny because I think it depends on different people too, because some people naturally handle pressure better. But like you're saying, kind of you build that confidence through doing work, and then you feel more confident in your ability to go out there and perform better. And so you believe it because you actually lived it. And then I also think after a certain point, like, first of all, it's 100% physical until my thought is like, it's not 100%, but like mostly physical until you get to a certain level. And then as you get to a higher level, it's like much more percentage mental because, at the top end, I think most guys are pretty physically gifted. They're doing a lot of the same stuff and the mental kind of separates there. But I think you bring up a good point. It's you train that mentality based on how you show up to the room every day, how you engage in everything. And that carries over in injuries as well.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, exactly, Ryan. It's all connected. So it's hard to give a percentage to one over the other because they're so interconnected. But I like the 51-49 split. And I think another thing that I found really useful in my wrestling career was and I think this is the point you're making, Bob, is if I did everything to the best of my ability, my preparation, I knew I left no stone unturned. Then by the time it came time to compete, then my mind was at ease. You're a lot less nervous when you prepare as hard and as best as you can.
Absolutely. And then for
Yeah.
Ryan's
Well,
point, yeah, I had a quick comment for is that, you know, I mean, Ryan was certainly at the very highest level, and there's a lot of psychology to that. But one thing that comes to mind is there's also an intellectual side to the psychology. It's just not controlling your mind to be positive and think like a champion. But let's say you're wrestling someone that's equal to you and very advanced, and you're in the finals of the Big Ten, or you're at a really high level. So you can't just come out and shoot a single. You can't just come out and do one fake and expect it to work. You have to intellectually develop and practice with repetition move sets that are for people that are elite level. So if you practice chains of 6 moves, whether it be 5 fakes in a move or 6 moves in combination, now you're intellectually training yourself physically, which comes from a psychological aspect of intelligence. You are intelligently training yourself how to chain wrestle and how to string together chains, and then you're going to unleash them when you're up against someone. And it becomes a game of strategy. It becomes a game of, okay, I've got a 6-part chain and another 6-part chain and another 6-part chain. You have 4 defenses, 5 defenses, but maybe not 6. But if you do have 6, can you also handle another chain that's coming at you that's 6? So that's where like the psychological aspect, the strategic aspect, which is a part of psychology, but it's part of the physical side too. And then the physical aspect of, hey, I'm tired. Can I still do my 6-part chain with precision? So they kind of all mesh together a little bit in that way, I think.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something too I kind of wanted to ask you a lot about as well, is like just knowing you a little bit and knowing people that know you. I mean, you're obviously a super smart guy, and you really look into like the metrics on things and why things work and stuff like that. But so where did this start? I mean, you get your MBA from a phenomenal, school. And what did your early career look like? Because then there's like almost a 20-year gap, and then you get your PhD. So were you taking this approach in a business world first, and then you switched over to the sports world again, kind of coming back to it? Or how did your early career look, and what made you decide, after 20 years of, most people are like probably set in their paths on one way, to go back, get your PhD and kind of change into, being president of a PT clinic now?
Well, that's a really great question. And so, one great thing about in the US, versus other countries is you can recreate yourself again and again and again. And in a lot of other countries, they identify you early on and say, this is what you're going to do and this is the path you're going to take. But, in the US, you could be 27, journalism, decide you want to go to med school, and you could be there at 32 or 33, so that's one great thing. And so if you're a lifelong learner like yourself, and this is why you guys have a podcast, you're taking in massive amounts of information, you're becoming better yourself and helping others to engage in lifelong learning. And so for me, similar to a lot of people I've heard you speak on that have spoken on the podcast is, I was a jock, and I was playing sports, and my brother, having not have a dad, he said to me when I was finishing undergrad, he said, choose a profession that you would do as a hobby and make it a career. And that was pretty good advice. So I basically chose physical therapy based on anatomy, based on movement, and based on wanting to help people move better and a study of human physiology and anatomy. And so I launched out in that, and along the way, I started to get excited about learning and learning sciences. I got exposed to a big company. I saw the resources that were available, and I said, "Hey, you know what? I mean, if I learn how to mobilize money through an MBA, how to quantify large scale business, that I could probably reach out to more people, right? And just like you're doing within your own work with fundraising and at Stanford and launching new programs and getting money to be able to grow resources and people. That's what I was thinking. And then the MBA at University of Chicago met those expectations. It's a great school. And it was though, I would say, going and studying business after coming out of science background was it took me a year to let that settle in because, it's the study in some ways of human greed, right? Where science is a study of science is a lot different. So it was great education, but what I like about that Chicago education with respect to wrestling and with respect to, what happens in business, but in wrestling in particular is they have strategic models, and wrestling falls under a zero sum model where you take, they lose. But there are business models that are cooperative competition as well. But wrestling has a lot of strategy. And, you know, with regard to strategy, you really have to start thinking, what am I bringing into each wrestling match, and then what are they bringing? And it's rock, scissors, paper. And then I know you guys are going to get excited about this. Every You guys are around so many great wrestlers, and they compete, and they go out on the mat, and technically they have tools that are unbelievable. That they could anything could happen on any given day. But it's rock, scissors, paper, and then the winner strategically comes out with the right tool that works against the opponent. And, just looking at that MBA, University of Chicago, and business models and strategy, that that transfers really well to wrestling. And I'm sure all the great coaches that that we see, I mean, they're strategic experts. And, so incorporating that into coaching wrestling is exciting. And the sooner you learn it, the better. But a lot of wrestlers in middle school, high school learn techniques. They have a basic strategy, but are they really thinking for each match? Hey, when am I going to go out? What are they bringing to the table, and how can I counter it? And what sort of chain wrestling do I want to bring out as well? So so once I did that MBA, it opened me up to analyzing sport differently and business and mobilizing resources and thinking strategically. And the PhD was just an extension of, hey, you know, I had taken every continuing ed course I possibly could. If I want to get more information to my brain, it's time to do a PhD and find new information. And I did running research on iliotibial band syndrome, and did that for 5 years and published and wrote on that. And so that was just an extension of lifelong pursuit of trying to get better and learn more within the field of physical therapy and science and running injuries. So really, it's that central theme to continuously improve, whether it be in coaching wrestling for people that are in a sport or in business. Right, you continuously get better, you learn, it's exciting, and you bring new information all the time to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, your desire to consume information is, obviously apparent through your resume and background, but also just the way you articulate things. And just when this 15 minutes we've been talking, how you even approach a wrestling match, or coaching a wrestling match. One question I have for you on kind of the mindset that you would bring, and I'm getting into coaching myself. Brian is a coach. So this is something interesting I grapple with the athletes, because especially when you're coaching an offensive mindset, you don't, and I was a wrestler, like I like to scout. I like to understand what my opponent was bringing. I like to understand the kind of strategy I was bringing into a match. I spent a significant amount of time, especially in college, scouting and becoming informed of my opponents. But there is also a line where you don't, especially when you're coaching an offensive mindset, where you don't want to be too conscious of your opponent's style or what they're bringing, and be focused on kind of what you're trying to execute. So I'm curious, how do you toe that line, and how do you coach that? Bringing your balance of offensive mindset that we discussed with your kind of your strategy focus as well.
Well, basically, and if you can incorporate this into your coaching and or have ideas on this, let me know. But for me, it's go out and attack a person low, attack them high, attack left, attack right, and read what they're doing. Is there a weakness? It's almost like you're going out and your initial shots and movements, you're trying to teach a person to start to read and feel, what's gonna be open, what are they giving me? And learning how to actually observe for that. So, I mean, there are basic things like if their legs are back and their trunk's too far forward, you might snap down, for example. But when you get in offensively, if I attack you on the right side and there's nothing there, I'm assuming that I should attack, the opposite side. So if I attack the right, you're probably going to be open on the left. You can't defend everything in combat, right? So definitely attacking side to side, coming in at different speeds, slow, fast, syncopated rhythms, uh, not being afraid to throw, not being afraid to go super low, just looking for openings. So, for me, your attack is where your strategy has to develop. And so wrestlers have to be taught real-time strategy and decision making to move up. And I know both of you have done that, but coaching it is a different story. And then I think it starts with patterns of moves and chains and repetition and speed training and power training, right? So that you have speed, really good footwork, so you can syncopate your rhythm and speed. But at some point, there's an intellectual side to wrestling where you are launching weapons at an opponent and you're trying to develop a real time strategy because scouting out and getting some intelligence will only take you so far. A good wrestler, once you do one thing to them, they're probably not going to do that a second time. So you have to be real time analyzing as the wrestler, and somehow in coaching, if there's a way to really coach real time strategy development while you're out there, and one simple way is to come at someone low, come at high, come on the right, come at the left, start reading their reactions, and mix it up. But what are your thoughts on strategy and real time wrestling? How would you approach or coach it?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. This reminds me of like the movie Moneyball. I think taking in data and figuring stuff out. And I think it's tough in wrestling. There's like some stat in wrestling, like 90% of the time, the guy that gets the first takedown wins the match. But then it's like, it's hard to take data like that because of course they got the first takedown. They're the better wrestler. Of course they're going to win the match, so like, but I do think what you're saying is super interesting because I think guys do it without, like, wrestling kind of gets this like bad rep for, not bad rep, but like I think sometimes it's just like, okay, it's two guys like kind of hurling themselves at each other. But there's like a lot of things that your mind's doing, like subconsciously processing. Like, I don't know why I felt like this guy was fake, like gonna take a shot, but it made me move my leg. And subconsciously, I've seen that happen so many times. And if you don't like disguise that the right way, my brain can recognize if that's like a real fake or if that's a real shot. And like sometimes you respect a fake, sometimes you don't. And so like through mat time and mat repetition, I think you learn that and you process your body. And it's kind of amazing how quickly the human body, any sport too, right? I mean, you're talking about baseball where you can't process how fast a ball's coming, but somebody knows when to swing or not to swing because their body's like just recognizes little cues and inspiring off of those cues. Coaching that, I think, like you're saying, I think repetition's awesome. I think a good wrestler is somebody that adapts quickly. They're a chameleon, right? Like they're taking this data and processing it quickly and adjusting on the fly. I think the one thing that's hard is like you can't cookie cutter approach everybody. Every wrestler's got different strengths and different weaknesses, and different styles clash stylistically differently. So like you might blow this guy out of the water and then this next guy's tough for you, even though he's ranked way worse than the guy before, So I think that's where you got to individualize it too. And you got your general strategies. I think of wrestling at like a high level, there's two different, like you got moves, you got like general technique and positioning, and then you got specific moves. And I think the goal is you teach the technique and then once you understand the technique, you start just following these rules. And so when stuff goes bad, like I know, get a leg up in the air, get backside, height in a scramble, get your hips into them. And you're following general patterns while you're just like chaos is coming at you. And so I think that's I don't know how I think about wrestling in a long-winded way, but it is interesting that it's such a different sport for everybody, and everybody's got their different factors that work well for them.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting, and I think Bob and Ryan, what you're talking, like, I think what someone who is able to process that real time information, feel, what an opponent is like, that is like someone you'll hear them say, like, that guy has a great wrestling feel, right? That's comes through a lot of repetition and practice. And I think to Ryan's point, a lot of times, very high, even on a very high level, you aren't aware that you're doing it or that it's happening. But I do think through good coaching, you could probably make an athlete more aware of the different movement patterns that they're going through to get to the desired outcomes. And, I think that would be a really good thing. I do also think another thing, I did it a lot myself, was to have like a systems-based approach. Like, oh, guys, a right leg lead. Okay, I'm looking for this move's my go-to. This move's my second. So I'm pulling, trying to get him to step with this foot and post. If he's not giving me that, then that opens up this, right? So I had like a system of things I would run through in every match. And I think a kind of a systems-based approach might help wrestlers develop that feel. And then, when you get to Ryan's level, then that feel is, it's happening, real time, thousands of tiny reactions per second. Yeah, it's a super interesting topic though. I think that's a good segue, Ryan, into kind of Bob, what you do just with athletes in general and making them more aware of these, kinesthetic chains and movement patterns within their own body.
Yeah, that's a fun topic, and so let's dive into it. I think that all three of us have worked in this area, but right now I spent the last 3 years with strength training high schoolers, Granada High School in Livermore, California, and it's it's really interesting to hear the comment that, hey, summer's coming, I'm going to lift and get big, and people get gigantic, but
There's nothing wrong with that. Just kidding.
they, so, and there's not, it's great. No, it's great. The thing about it is that, what it's not footwork. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily things that you're going to use in wrestling. So, I've always encouraged performance-based training, because, well, I mean, if socially you want to get big in high school to look good, that's
Yeah.
great. But eventually you're going to come back, and if you're wrestling, you're going to lose some weight. You're going to lose a lot of that muscle. And then people are going to evaluate you on performance anyhow. So if social is what you're going for, you might as well train for performance, because performance is going to probably have a better image in the long run, because you got big muscles and go out and lose, right?
Yeah. That's
So for
interesting too.
one, I always like to go for performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then with regard to performance, there's also like injury prevention, right? And so if you're like buffed out and your quads are big and you're gigantic, which is good, but you go out there and someone shoots a single on you, and they spin and rotate and your feet don't rotate, and you blow out your ACL or your MCL, and now you're out for 2 months. And so I do see that in people that just lift all summer and don't do footwork. They're not working on flexibility. They don't have a running program. So, for me, I'm a strong advocate for broad-based training that includes body weight exercise with high repetition, things that are power development, box jumps, uh, any, off season plyometric, a lot of jump rope, a lot of footwork activity, sprinting on a field, running steps on the bleachers 2 at a time, up super aggressive to develop power or running up hills, but I happen to like the steps. So really a broad-based program that's equally divided, where you're doing some weights, and when you do your weights, have a hip hinge, have your head and chest up. You should you should always be in a position where you could throw a punch, do a tackle. You are in a position where you could shoot a takedown. If you're working out with weights, or working out, or even really around the office and work, man, you should be moving in a position where you can do something athletic. Otherwise, you're out of position. So strong advocate for being in positions where your hips are hinged, your chest is up. And again, that would be the position you would be in to field a baseball, to throw a punch, or do something athletic. And then, when you're lifting, yes, some of the reps sets could be for strength, like a higher weight, low rep, but some of the sets maybe should be higher reps as well. So I try and mix up like a 10 rep, 5, 5, 15, and then 2 sets of 15. And then in between that, throw in some body weight stuff, like some push-ups with a clap, or 10 or 15 box jumps, or, doing some ab roller, some body weight things, that are going to make you physically, hard to move around on a wrestling mat, or, a little bit more firm if you're tackling on a football field. So, mixing in body weight in between the weightlifting, having, 3 to 5 times a week on a sprinting program, doing some flexibility on your thoracic spine, the front of your hips, which is going to enhance the ability to recruit your gluteus maximus and gluteal muscles. And when you're recruiting those nicely, you can handle rotational force that you get injured less, and you're actually a lot stronger. So a little bit of core work, right? So plank, side plank, eyes, Y's, and T's on a ball, whatever you do for core. So kind of a blended program, flexibility, core, weightlifting for sure, which we do all summer, a little bit of plyometric off season, running program. And then I find that equates to better performance. How do you guys feel about your approach to training?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think I mean, you hit the nail on the head with like, you got to have a lot of different things. And I think, some of the struggles is you run out of time with just how many things you do. But I do think that there's different seasons of, in the off season, you might be a little bit more focused on weight training. And then in season, it's less weight training. It's more wrestling. Preseason, you're building, your aerobic base with some running. One thing I wanted to ask you about too, though, that kind of, I want to know how you think about this is like every athlete just about has some kind of muscle imbalance, right? Like if I'm a pitcher, I'm way overdeveloped on one side. If I'm a wrestler, I'm a staggered stance. My left leg's forward, my right leg's back. That's my drive foot. I'm definitely, you try to even that out with, unilateral strength training, different things like that. Every wrestler I've ever met, their shoulders are always rolled forward because you're wrestling like this with the stance all the time. So how do you think about like muscle imbalances, fixing them, but then also understanding like certain muscles that help you in certain sports, them being stronger helps you in the sport as well. So it's like, don't let it get out of hand where you get hurt, but it's an advantage to have that muscle, stronger in that position as well. Be curious to hear what you have to think about that stuff.
That's a great question, and glad to dive into it. So I think first off, early on, if you're choosing, like you're developing your kids and they're 5, 6, 7, and 8, it's a good idea to do things that are bilateral, right from the get-go. So, you're not systematically and developing that issue early on. So things like judo early on, where you learn how to fall and you're going left and right, and then maybe within
Mac's a
developing,
big judo fan.
yeah,
I
yes,
started
I
in
think
judo, Bob.
yeah, and I put my kid into judo. He got a fracture in his ulna in a freestyle tournament, like in 4th grade. And my wife said, "I don't think that sport's good for him," And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll get him fall training." She said, "You better." And I said, so I
Yeah.
signed him up for judo. And I told my wife, I said, "Hey, we're starting fall training starting this week." She says, "Great. That's a good thing." Meanwhile, put him in judo and he's getting thrown 180
Yeah,
times.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But we were both happy about that. My wife and I both. But actually the judo was really good for that, not system. You go left and right, you go equal, and you learn how to fall. And it's a really good adjunct, especially early on, and it's fun. But with regard to what you're saying, like a baseball player is swinging a bat on one side and throwing, I think there are systematic things that you have to do in training to counter that. And one is
Mm.
your thoracic spine, the middle of your spine. you need to maintain that extension because if that gets over flexed with unilateral development and also with sitting, really bad things happen. You back lean. And when you start to back lean, your center mass goes behind your hips and your gluteus maximus, your posterior hip muscles, they start to turn off because there's no reason to contract when your upper body back leans. So if you're systematically throwing and you're overflexed on one side, it usually shows up in your mid trunk. And so, doing flexibility on a foam roller, on a ball, child's pose, yoga, whatever, but keeping, your spine being able to extend nicely. And that's one area. And that parallels the front of the hip. So if you maintain flexibility in your iliopsoas, your hip flexor, and your rectus femoris, which is the long quad that goes above the hip, if your hip extends nicely, you get really good gluteus maximus recruitment. And that's key because if you lose that mid back and the front of the hip flexibility, your core muscles turn off. As you back lean and turn off your glute, you're also turning off your abdominal core. You start to drop in your breathing, which I know is one of your podcasts or a topic of concern to both of you. And so, all those things start to work against you. So you really want to make sure you don't systematically train in certain directions to where your thoracic spine gets tight, the front of your hips get tight, and your posterior chain is at risk for getting weak, from sitting, from posture, but also unilateral in sport. So, blending your anterior chain and posterior chain when you train. So if I do biceps, maybe triceps are good. If I'm doing chest, maybe lats are good. So blending your weightlifting workouts so that you're posturing up, but also your core, posterior chain. So core is not just the abdominal area. There are core muscles in your elbow, your wrist, your hip, your knee, and your ankle. And I know that excites you guys, but it's exciting. So core muscles are anti-gravity muscles. They're red. They're isometric in nature and they function all the time. So you really want to train all the core muscles in the body. So if you're lifting, you might add some isometric holds. Like if I do a pull up, hold 1, 2, 3, and down slow. So as you isometrically hold, you're going to mobilize your core. But also, there's straight core work, plank, a side plank, an abdominal roller. You go, face down on a ball with 3-pound weights and hold them in a T position for a minute or two. You're getting your posterior core. So any isometric exercise is going to get your core. So if you're concerned about muscle imbalances, whether it be wrestling, baseball, football, tennis, you want to have good spine flexibility and extension, good anterior hip flexibility in the front of your quads. It doesn't hurt to get hamstrings as well, but those other areas are super important. And then posterior chain activity, balancing your weightlifting, anterior and posterior chain. And those are the things that come to mind to counter some of those challenges.
That's super interesting. I have a question or a follow up because an interesting point you made earlier about performance versus size. But I had an interesting. I was I went from 197 to heavyweight in college, which is an interesting path. But for me, it was a combination of both. Size equaled performance because I didn't want to get fat, right? I didn't want to put on sloppy weight. I was like, I'm going to put on as much lean tissue as I can and have that lean tissue function for wrestling. But it was a combination of both. So, how would you think about approaching that where, it's important to have the muscle tissue as well as the performance. So the muscle tissue is serving as a way to gain weight and maintain a good strength weight ratio.
Yeah. It's a great question. So if I had a toolkit and then I was going to go in to a house and I had to fix things, I wouldn't want just a wrench or a plier. And I'd want all those tools, right? So, there is a difference between lightweight, middleweight, and heavyweight. That's why there's coaches that work with different, weights, right? And I am biased a little bit to
It's a great
lightweights,
answer.
really fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if but let's just take that. We're going, from 195 or whatever to heavyweight. Definitely muscle mass. But if we look at, people out there that are unbeatable in heavyweight level, they move unbelievably well. So you name the ones that are almost impossible to beat, they're just moving a little bit better. So obviously footwork and agility and, everyone knows power is great, and then but you gotta be able to move those feet, and it's if you have footwork in addition to strength, and you have explosive strength, and then you have that flexibility. So let's say I'm big and strong, but not flexible. I look at that like having a Porsche that I have in the garage that can't go out and ride it on the road. Like, you know flexibility constrains strength. You if I'm a baseball
For
pitcher and
sure.
I can't accelerate, as long because I'm about an inch short, my backstroke and throwing, so to say, I'm gonna accelerate less. And it's probably true in wrestling. I haven't analyzed it officially, but it's on the list of things to analyze, and that is where does flexibility fit into power? Because if you're more flexible, you're going to accelerate for a longer period of time. So you're probably gonna come in, with more power. And so I would say a heavyweight that's tearing it up is has some functional flexibility. They're always in position. They got fast feet. They've got power. They've got isometric strength. They've got that grip of death, but they also have, they also have your conventional concentric strength where, they can lift. But when they put you
Right.
down, they're in control. And if they have to grip and hold, you're not breaking the grip. Yet they have fast feet. And then that's where you're starting to, on a combat level, start to say, oh, I've got my hands full here because I got somebody who's strong, fast, flexible. And that's where you could create some anxiety in somebody, right? If you have all those, and then when they get anxious, they're not going to be thinking clearly, and that's what makes wrestling fun. So, I think that getting big, it will help you win a lot, but getting fast feet might take you over the top.
Yeah, get big and strong, and then you got the intimidation factor with the psychology piece too, where you come out jacked and you're single. Nah, I'm just kidding. But there's
Sounds-
two there's two things I want to touch on with that. Is one, I do think it depends on weight class. So I loved your answer with that because I also like in the off season when I'd put on a little bit of muscle mass, like I think you got to be continue to wrestle while you're doing that because you'll feel it a little bit more. Muscle's like expensive tissue in terms of like oxygen and stuff like that. So there's a trade off there. I definitely felt like I was always had a better gas tank when I was, leaner and training those systems, but I also wanted to make sure I was maintaining muscle mass and feeling strong. And, I thought strength was really important as well. But you do see some guys like, gain a bunch of weight in the off season and maybe they're not training as much, but they get tired a little bit quicker. And then the other thing is the mobility training thing. I don't know where I stand on this, but I want to ask both of you actually. There's two different thoughts, I think, where some people are like mobility training, you need to be doing it. And then I've heard people be like, nah, you weightlift, you do weightlifting. When you're wrestling, that's your mobility training. You're literally flexed in motion doing mobile stuff. And so like, there's a fine line of, I think there's two different paths now. Like people are going like, I need to be very functional in my weight training to, like just straight strength training, put on mass. And I think that like, maybe the answer is more in the middle. I think I probably lie a little bit more on I think weightlifting, like you're trying to put on muscle when you're in the weight room. And then you're using that muscle in the wrestling room. But some people think that you got to cross it over. And like sometimes it's like, you're trying to do a lot of different things and you don't get, I don't know,
Yeah.
Max, you look like you're ready to. Yeah.
I want to hop in real quick and I'll turn it over to Bob. I think, yeah, and that's kind of the specificity of training. And I think like, to your point, Ryan, there's nothing more specific for wrestling and building wrestling strength than wrestling because that is wrestling. That being said, we all train outside of the wrestling room because it is necessary.
Yep.
I think one thing that you can maybe accomplish a little bit of two things at once when it comes to lifting weights, and I think this is one of the biggest mistakes in weight training as well. And Bob, I'd love to get your opinion. But if you're training the full ranges of motion in a balanced program that covers anterior, posterior, in multiple planes of motion, I think you can be accomplishing your mobility training while you're accomplishing your weight training. And now, there's a lot of science coming out where, most of the tissue damage and muscle growth is coming from training in the very lengthened positions of the muscle, right? Which also happens to be where you're developing the most mobility. So I think you can kind of kill two birds with one stone there, but it does have to be programmed well and someone has to be executing it well. Cause Bob, you train high school kids. They want to go in and move the most weight they can for their buddies. They end up doing half reps. They get all tight. They're not actually training full ranges of motion and really lengthening that tissue under load. They're moving weight, but impressing their buddies, but they're not, accomplishing what they could be with a proper strength training program. So I think, Ryan, to your point, it's a little bit of both. And I think if done right, you can do a lot with proper weight training. But Bob, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah. So I mean, it also a factor is what is the skill level that you're training. And so on a high school level where people aren't moving expert level in the wrestling room yet, you know, then they're not going to get the full mobility training unless they develop the physical capacity to move that way. And
That's
so
a great point.
you're trying to inspire them. They definitely should lift weights, and they should lift weights with great form where you're hip hinging in positions that you use in wrestling. Like your deadlift should have perfect form, back squat, front squat, whatever you're doing. And then there's some of that weightlifting might even be injury prevention, like a single leg deadlift is something that develops your glute. But you're trying to get them to hip hinge and keep their chest up so that when they go into the wrestling room, they have the strength to do those positions, but they also have the power to be able to lift people and have fun. So I think it depends. Like for Ryan, when you guys walk into your super high level wrestling room on a college level, those people are moving well. Um, they are going to get functional mobility in there, and then when they go in the weight room, they can be more efficient and just develop strength. And hopefully they're
That's such a
moving
good point,
extremely well in the
actually.
weight room.
Yeah,
So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's so you're saying, like, with a lot of high school wrestlers are not putting themselves in all the functional, positions
yeah.
that they could be if as a high level wrestler. So you need to take that into account in their program. That's a great point.
I think that's, yeah, I love that point too. And I think also just thinking about strength training in my own career too. And now, post college, a little bit older athlete, like for, maybe wrestling, I'm 26, but
Watch it there.
yeah, but I do think that like I enjoy lifting weights, so I would lift weights, but I do think it's like part of my job because it keeps me healthy. Like when my hamstrings are strong, my knees feel tight and I don't feel like I'm going to like tear something when I get in a tricky situation when I'm wrestling. And so I think, um, like you're saying, there's a lot of different benefits to strength training, and it definitely depends on the level of the athlete and what their goal is with it. But I think that there's such a strong component, and we've talked about it a little bit. So I'd love to hear kind of what you were saying and kind of what you're talking about with your book, because I think you're talking a lot about just going back and forth, something that you said to me, psychologically speaking, when your body has healthy and calm communication systems intact, then good things happen to your muscles and your tendons are happy, And so I think a lot of what you're talking about is that, and how motion, if you make your body like feel good through that motion and strengthen, tendons, ligaments, joints, muscles, it helps you in your sport and it's helping you perform at the thing you're performing at. You can't make weightlifting like the performance-based thing unless that's your sport. If you're powerlifting, you probably want to get pretty good at throwing up big weight. But I'd like to hear like what your thoughts are in terms of tendons, ligament strength, because you're writing a book on this, right? I don't know how much you can talk about it. We'd love to hear any inside stuff on that.
Sure. I mean, just as an introduction, I had this course at University of Chicago taught by an NSA guy. His name is Marvin Zonas, and it was on leadership. And he had all these declassified uh, psychoanalysis of world leaders, and you had to choose one. There was Gandhi. There was every world leader and throughout history where they were no longer like actively like analyzing. So there were all these psychoanalysis of Adolf Hitler I chose. So all of a sudden I get all these reports from Marvin Zonas that were famous psychologists that psychoanalyzed Adolf Hitler. And I had never really knew what psychoanalysis was, but it was basically as his mother knew him, as his mistress knew him, as his friends knew him, as his generals knew him, just every different perspective you could possibly get. So it was super interesting because I never really thought like that. In working with sport injuries, I began, I'm working with knees and shoulders and hips, and people would come in and say, "Hey, mentally, I got to be in this race. I have got to get back, for the state wrestling tournament. I need to make it into this football game, and I need to get this many tackles." And I was thinking, okay, that's your brain's perspective, but what is your knee saying? What is your ankle saying about you? What is your shoulder? I know this is kind of nerdy here, but when you're working on shoulder, knees, hips, and with your hands for 20 plus years, you, I feel like those joints communicate to me and tell me what the owner of the body is actually doing. And so while we are trying to self actualize our brains to achieve things, we're not always really thinking about the perspective of the parts of your body that could be injured or painful. And you're like, my stupid knee is holding me back. Well,
Mhm.
you probably shouldn't say it's a stupid knee. You probably should like think about, okay, what's actually going on? Well, maybe your knee's been working as hard as it possibly could plus overtime, and maybe something above or below hasn't been working to support it. So as you begin to look at athletic injuries and injuries in general, for everyday people as well, usually it's lack of teamwork. Like it's never a knee, hip, or shoulder. I mean, there's always something that led to that was preventable, or that maybe your body could have responded differently. So if you want to get things better, you need to kind of take, a more of a teamwork approach. So let's say take knees, for example. If I blew out my knee, chances are it was in the wrong position when the event happened, because if you're in the right position, there's a good chance it wouldn't have blown out. I mean, things do happen. There's always a chance it's unique trauma, but probably if you responded where the force came into your knee through your foot, knee, hip, and your trunk all absorbed that energy, it would have been distributed over a large area, just like falling in judo. It doesn't hurt if you do it right.
Mhm.
So really, like these injuries that occur in your body, you don't want to think about just a shoulder, a knee, a hip, or an ankle. You want to really think, you know, what happened with the injury and how can I get teamwork, in my leg and my arm. So for a knee, you need a stronger hip. And to have a stronger hip, you need to have flexibility in your spine and your core working in your abdomen. And if your shoulders hunched forward, it's probably going to tell your mid back to be flexed, which is going to tell your core and your abdomen to not really kick in. And you need all that to happen. And for your gluteus maximus to work, and you need your gluteus maximus to control your femur when you hit the ground running or shooting a takedown, or you rotate your femur into the ground. Well, you got an injured knee. So you're not just rehabbing a knee, and you need to understand what the knee needs to allow it to get better, or to allow it to not be injured in the first place. And it needs regional based strength and conditioning. It needs a core muscle system that works. So what Ryan and I were talking about is your core muscle system is your isometric system. It works all the time. It postures you. And when that core muscle system is active, then these big muscles that create power they can function better, and you can generate power throughout your whole body. So really, in order to generate power, you need communication, over a broad area where your core muscles are working and not being dominated by overly active extremity muscles that are basically creating huge amounts of torque. And meanwhile, your core, your central body is not stabilizing that torque. So you're like an arm throwing a
Mhm.
punch or a leg kick instead of, an entire body throwing a kick with much more force. So you want integrated training. Your core muscle system should be working. You should be in good position. And then you create that torque with your extremity. You turn it on, you turn it off, and you're still in good position. And then that, comes down to teamwork and performance to prevent injuries. You want all those structures interacting in a way where they're all communicating, working as a team, absorbing forces into your body so you can then unleash the force back out. And so it's really just getting in touch with hey, what does my knee, hip, ankle, shoulder think about me? Am I wearing the right shoes? Do I treat it nicely? Am I saying good things about it?
Mhm.
And do I train my body regionally? And
Yeah.
and that's the essence of the concept.
I love that. I think that's such a good and such a cool concept, and I'm excited to read your book once it comes out. But one thing that I had that I was thinking about while you're talking about this is so that makes a lot of sense in diagnosing a problem and your body's communicating with you like, okay, my knee hurts. So that means there's an issue around there. And you're saying like you're overusing your knee because something else isn't firing. How do you prevent that before it gets bad? Or is it like, the second it starts hurting, you just start looking into this? Or how do you think about preventative instead of like, how can you be proactive on your body being in the wrong positions instead of being reactive?
Yeah, what a great. I mean, this is the $1 million question, because you have athletes like Michael
Mhm.
Jordan that always recovered quickly and stayed out of trouble. And he had his training systems down. So most of your great athletes are preventing getting injured, and when they do get injured, they have teams, people, systems set up to get them back in action. And Steph Curry put it together, right? In basketball, like, he's doing a lot better. He's had some major injuries, but he is looking so good. He moves so well. And so some people figure it out, and you gotta stay on top of it. But the general concepts are that you do need some broad-based training, and yes, weights are super important, being strong, really important, but you need to balance your anterior and posterior chain. You need to have good flexibility in your mid back so that you don't back plane. You need really good flexibility in the front of your hips. You need to have your core muscle systems activated. Meaning, you hold yourself in good posture, not just when you're wrestling, but when you're studying and doing other things. You want to move well. I think internationally, I once met a weightlifting expert from Russia, and I was doing some flexibility with a weightlifter in California, and they had me and him meet. And we met with the weightlifter, and the Russian coach expert. He said, we don't train flexibility in Russia because our athletes are required to move well all the time, right? And so, I think that if you don't want to get injured, you want to move well, you want to be biomechanically, top positions with your hips hinged, your spine needs to be up, and you need to unleash power from your trunk. So it comes back to always being in position. If you've got feet that aren't moving well, they're blocks of wood, you got a really strong body, you're gonna put a lot of rotational force into your legs, and it's gonna get picked up in your knee and hip. So you need fast feet. You need to have technique where you're coming in correctly with your feet in the right position. You want power developed through your hips, and you want to be able to decelerate. So you need eccentric or your negatives on your strengthening, so you can slow down once you accelerate. So it's broad-based training with good strength coaches, flexibility, diet kicks into it, sleep kicks into it. I mean, they're all components, and if you miss any of those areas, your percentage chance of getting injured goes up. And then you want a rehab team and strength coaches and people to help get you back in action. And it includes sleep and nutrition, mindset, technique training, and weightlifting, and all the elements that you bring up in your podcast.
Yeah, that's a ton of wisdom right there. I think one of them, and I'm actually learning this even more and more, Bob, because I'm competing in powerlifting now, which it's
Right.
like, the sole goal is to be strong. But to your point, like just moving heavy weight doesn't cut. You're only gonna get so strong. You have to have that perfect balance. Everything has to be working together, anterior, posterior, to actually get as strong as you can. So to your point, Bob, like I think strength is a combination of, pure strength, but also the mobility, flexibility, coordination, balance, everything that you just referred to is ultimately that is what makes someone really strong. Just having the muscle tissue there is only one part of it. And that's why you see some of these powerlifters are, strongest people in the world aren't 400 pounds or 200 pounds, but they're able to have all those systems work together. So yeah, it's a really great point.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Like I knew a lot of, I've had teammates that are crazy strong in a weight room. and it doesn't translate into a wrestling sense, or vice versa. Somebody that like you see them in the weight room and they're not lifting a lot of weight, but they're really strong in a wrestling room. And so I think like you're saying, you can train these, but it's really important how the muscles interact together, not just like one specific movement. And Max, like you're saying, like, I don't know, I've heard definitely like power leak. Like if you're like doing a military press and your wrist isn't completely flexed, you're losing a lot of power when you're trying to push straight above over your head. So I do think that's super interesting, and it makes me think a lot about, training and how you can do something better based on fixing that movement. The problem is sometimes, you get an athlete at 22 years old and it's pretty hard to change a movement pattern that they've been doing since they were, 4 years old when they started their sport.
Yeah, that is especially in the college coaching level, I can imagine that being a difficult thing to crack.
I think most guys
the bad habits.
They come with great habits. So I think most guys, 'cause if you're successful and at a college level, you usually have, figured out your movement patterns to some degree. Obviously, you can always improve on that. But I think like you're saying, like setting it up and when you're younger is a huge and important thing. And then continuing to try to get better as you get older too.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have to have you on again after your book comes out and we read it. And yeah, just a wealth of knowledge, definitely interesting approach. I definitely want to keep picking your brain about kind of how you're using metrics and what you're doing and thinking about stuff. But I really like your, holistic approach to everything in training. And I feel like you just have a wealth of knowledge. So I really appreciate you, sharing that with everybody.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
I really
Keep up.
appreciate it.
Yep, same here. So thank you.
Yeah. I just blessed it. You said, it sounds nerdy, but I could sit here and nerd about this for hours with you. So yeah, really appreciate the hour we got. See ya.